Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Rebecca Bartlett-Jones, Manager of Business Development at Green Key Global. Green Key Global is the hotel and lodging industry's sustainable certification program of choice. Today, one of our preferred suppliers, APTIM, will be talking to us about ESG reporting, what it is and why it matters in hospitality. But before we get started, there's a bit of a housekeeping list I want to go over. Your participation is absolutely encouraged throughout the session. At any time during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. Please use the thumbs up icon to upvote questions in the queue. This will help us get your questions more quickly. And finally, we will be recording today's session and it'll be available on demand on the Green Key Global website. So today's session will discuss and introduce you to environmental, social, and governance reporting, the importance it plays in the hospitality industry. We will be going over why it matters, as well as best practices for hoteliers to begin their ESG reporting or improve their current efforts. So now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speakers. Christian Detman, Client Relationship Manager for the hospitality industry within APTIM's Compliance and Permitting Division. Monica Tilges, APTIM's Sustainable Sport Index Product Lead, and David Orvis, Senior Product Manager with APTIM's Energy and Environmental Business Unit. So without any further ado, over to them.
Rebecca, thank you very much for the introduction and welcome everybody. We appreciate you joining us today. So today's agenda will cover a brief introduction of APTIM and discuss why ESG reporting matters for the hospitality industry. We will do an overview of ESG report itself and discuss in greater detail on benchmarking goals to help get you started on your own reports if you've not begun that journey. We will recap our presentation with some key takeaways, and we'll open up for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and let's get going. APTIM is a larger environmental consulting firm that is headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with an additional 55 offices throughout the rest of the United States and a few offices worldwide. We have over 4,000 employees on our team, and they're all focused on the success of all of our clients. Our core services are critical infrastructure, which includes disaster response and recovery. In fact, we've got a large team already deployed in Florida in response to Hurricane Ian. We've got our technical and data solutions team where we work with our clients on fire protection and compliance, permitting, and licensing needs. Of course, our environmental services that assist our hospitality clients with their waste minimization. It also includes our grant management services. Our program management services that include our ESG solutions, resilience services and last but not least, our sustainability and energy solutions. This includes clean energy, energy efficiency solutions for our hotel clients, as well as including EV charging stations. So now that you've got a little bit of an understanding of who APTIM is, let's talk about our objectives today. Our goal is to demystify ESG reporting, share ESG goals and activity trends within the hospitality industry. We will identify practical steps to get started with ESG reporting. Now, the industry defines ESG as environmental, social, and governance, the three main topic areas on which companies are expected to report. The goal of ESG is to capture all the non-financial risks and opportunities inherent to a company's day-to-day activities. So why does that matter to hospitality? Well, the customers or guests really care. Booking.com's recent report states that 72% of travelers believe that action needs to be taken now for sustainable choices. Consumers are looking for that transparency from businesses on their sustainable efforts. In addition, new SEC impacts will not only require publicly traded companies to improve on their current reporting, but these requirements will blend into the lending side. Future business loans will require ESG reports to be included in all financial deals. The industry's revenue channels are making this a standard. Booking.com has launched their travel sustainable program that identifies properties that have completed their sustainable questionnaire. Expedia.com is looking at a similar program for their partner hotels, but have launched an amenity search criteria for electric vehicle charging stations. And the most recent program that was launched by Google last month is pulling their certification information, just like Green Key Global, and including that into their search engine. You can see an example of Google's eco-certified listing from a random property that I chose. It discusses which eco certifications the property has obtained, their water conservation efforts, energy efficiency efforts, waste reduction programs, and the sustainable sourcing being done by the property. So we are now seeing an increase in enforcement from agencies that are specifically targeting the hospitality industry. We will go into some of those larger fines being assessed to hotels later in our presentation, as well as greater detail in other webinar series that we'll be doing. We're also seeing multiple business cases being reported within hotels that sustainable efforts and activities are good for business and increasing the bottom line of hotels. As we now have an understanding of drivers in the industry, let's take a deeper dive into the ESG report. Why do we do an ESG report? Well, first, it's brand building. As we mentioned, customers are looking for transparency. The report will show the commitment, competency, and authenticity of a property. Second, your current and future guest interests. Next, competition. The hospitality industry is a competitive market already, and your competitors are already publishing annual reports. The value of your ESG reports builds your credibility with your current and potential future guests. You might have heard of the term greenwashing, and that the hospitality industry is actually being recognized as one who has reduced the trust of their guests by marketing green activities and not really walking the walk that they state. And finally, utilizing your ESG report to recruit and retain top talent. We all know what the labor market is within hospitality, and reports show that employees are more engaged with employers who practice sustainable efforts. Monica?
Awesome. So now I'm gonna go take you down like a nerd journey a little bit. I love a graph. So this, I won't make you read all of this. I'll give you the kind of the cheat sheet right now. On the horizontal axis, you have leadership's commitment to sustainability. So on the right is high commitment, on the left is no belief. And then on the vertical axis, on top, you view this as an opportunity. It's part of your culture, sustainability is, and the lower end is like, this is just risk, play defense on it. So companies kind of live on one of these six different buckets. So first is rejection. This is horrifying, stay away from it, do everything we can to like not get involved. The second is non-responsive, saying, I'm gonna just do a full ostrich here, stick my head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist. The third is compliance, which is I'm gonna follow the basic things that I need to do, but I'm not gonna do a stitch more. The bucket number 4 is efficiency, saying, you know, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to do something where it like makes strong business sense, like where it doesn't cost me anything or it actually saves me money. Bucket 5 is I'm going to do a little bit more than that. I'll invest a little bit. I want to make sure that we're making steps and can have that green brand, but we're not going to be on the bleeding edge. And the final bucket is the sustaining corporation. These are companies who are like, this is important to our brand. We will lead the charge. We will bear additional costs. We're going to carve the path for others. The red circle here is where the industry was about like 10 years ago, where you saw some of those big brands, who I won't name, but you know who they are, who started publishing ESG reports or sustainability reports. There can be a lot of different names for it, because it was important to their brand and they wanted to really align with those values. A few years later, we saw the group, the number 5, the strategically proactive companies join there too. Again, these were typically brands who felt like this was important to their model, but maybe they weren't kind of on the bleeding edge. And then just a couple of years ago, we started getting those efficiency folks joining, and you started to see expansion into management companies and even some of the franchisees who are starting to make efforts because there's a decent business case for a lot of sustainability initiatives. And then while the 1, 2, 3 aren't on the bleeding edge, they're starting to get included, right? And the way that they're getting included is because 5 and 6 up top are starting to talk about not only their impacts of their direct operations, but also they're reporting out on the impacts they're having on their suppliers, their vendors, and their franchisees. So if you're don't identify as a 4, 5, or 6. If you're in a 1, 2, 3 and you're reporting up through a brand, you're kind of getting pulled in, maybe not to publish your own ESG report, but certainly to contribute to the ESG reports of your brands. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like for you specifically. But before we do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a deep dive on an ESG report, kind of a typical structure, right? Just so that you know kind of what it is. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on every detail here because not everybody on this call is going to be putting in an ESG report. We're going to spend most of the time on the meat, where you really need to show ESG initiative traction. So the first sections are usually about the company, kind of what the company's ESG strategy is, goals, achievements, program certification. So it's really that intro section. And then the meat is the ESG, environment, social, governance. Environment includes things like carbon, right? So what's your carbon footprint? What is your waste footprint? How much water are you using? What efforts are you taking in each of those areas? And what are your goals and how are you tracking those goals? Social is the same kind of thing, but for more social initiatives. How are you impacting your community? How are you making traction on D&I initiatives? That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how are you promoting or ensuring that you're equally treating your women and and underrepresented minorities in your business practices? How are you helping to address health issues with your staff and with your clients? Training and development, that includes things like professional development and responsible sourcing, all fall under that category typically. And then the final big kind of meat piece is governance. So that's more about like leadership structure. How do you have a board of directors? What does your executive team look like? What types of policies and procedures do you have in place to make sure that you're kind of a really well-functioning organization? And what kind of data privacy and cybersecurity things do you have in place? These are all, safety also shows up in social too, oftentimes. These are all pretty typically how you see things bucketed. If you look at anybody's ESG report, everyone's going to look a little bit different, right? So sometimes you'll see responsible sourcing actually show up under the E. Sometimes the internal social initiatives we pulled up as a separate section, but in general, all of these areas are covered. And the final section you typically see in these is your frameworks. So how do you report out? How did you do your analysis? How did you identify your priorities and how are they measured? Definitely not going to spend much time or any additional time on these because they could take up an entire presentation by themselves. But here are some of the more common ones that some of you may recognize from your forays into the world of ESG. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the E and the S and talking through benchmarking that we did with specific organizations in your industry, because that's where really you're taking actions and you're measuring goals. And that's where everybody that's viewing this presentation will be impacted, and not just those who are actually preparing their own ESG report. So here's just a very quick NASCAR slide identifying a few of the brands whose reports we pulled down from the internet and evaluated to inform our benchmarking. This is not comprehensive, but we tried to really cover as many as we could. And these are publicly available, so you should feel free to benchmark who you view to be your peers, and that can be just looking up sustainability report Caesars, and poof, there it is. Okay, so I warned you about a little bit of nerdiness. I'm going to take you on another journey. Benchmarking carbon. So carbon is a really big topic in ESG reports. It's one of the bigger components of the E side. So carbon is loosely equates to energy, right? And when you see this in ESG reports, you see people talk about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. This is a little bit confusing unless you spent some time really studying it. But here's a visual that we created to help make it a little bit easier for folks in hospitality to navigate. So scope 1 emissions are essentially things that are very much within your control. They are fuels that are combusted on site. So natural gas for water heat, for space heating, your fleet vehicles, so ones that you own and you control how much gas you put in those would be typical scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is your grid-based electricity. Right, if somebody combusts fuel offsite and sends you steam and you use that for your facilities, that would count too. And then scope 3 is kind of everything else where you have some impact, but not as directly under your control. So if you're a brand, for example, your franchised hotels are typically considered scope 3. So any of the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions of those franchisees would be a scope 3 emission for a brand. Landfill waste, employee travel, or other kind of typical scope 3 emissions. And who counts where depends a little bit on where you sit, right? If you're a brand, if you're a management company, or if you're a franchisee. Okay, so now we're going to get into benchmarking. So what did we actually see? Don't get too excited. Before we dive into the results, I'm actually going to orient you to these slides because this is a format that I'm going to use a few times throughout this presentation. So whenever you're creating goals for an ESG report, they talk about baseline years and goal years. A baseline, because the goals are typically structured like we're going to achieve X percent or X amount reduction by X year when compared to a baseline year of whatever. So a typical baseline year is 2008 to 2019, and goal years pretty much are 2025, 2030, and 2050. Those are pretty typical things. So you'll see those as repeated throughout the presentation. I won't orient you to them every time, I promise, because I don't want you to go into a coma. Then the top blue box is for properties that are under your direct control, right? So if you're a brand, that's your managed properties, your directly managed properties. If you're a franchisee, that's your property, right? And if you're, I'm not going to talk a lot about management companies because it really depends on how you're structured as to where you kind of fit here, but hopefully this gives you enough to be able to navigate that space. So when we're talking about carbon intensity or carbon reduction goals, there are a few different types that we were seeing, right? So the absolute carbon reduction, we're seeing ranges from 10 to 100%. So that says we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030 or by 100% by 2050. This is an interesting strategy because, as most of you know, or as you all know, when you're talking about portfolios of properties, they can increase or decrease over time. And if you're talking about an absolute carbon reduction, even if you're putting out, I'm making things up, 100 tons, and you're saying we're going to get to 50 tons, but you double the amount of sites in your portfolio, then that becomes a little bit more difficult to obtain. We're seeing a wide range of 10 to 100%. 10% usually means that they have a baseline year that's more recent because they haven't already made a lot of progress there, and that maybe their goal year is a little bit sooner. So that's like your baseline year is 2019, your goal year is 2025. The 100% reductions are pretty much exclusively for the 2050 goals. And those always, at this point, are including things like renewable energy credits or offsets to help you kind of close the final gap. The next level we see are carbon intensity reductions. So these are for organizations who do anticipate kind of that ebb and flow in terms of the number of properties that they would include in their portfolio. And this is your carbon intensity or carbon usage per square meter, per square foot, per occupied room, per conditioned square foot, right? All of those are different kind of takes on carbon intensity. And those we saw 25 to up to 61% in our analysis. And then another really common goal that we see is folks bringing in renewables. So we're seeing a fair amount of their electricity from renewables, 30 to 100%. Again, that 100% tends to be those further timelines. And then franchisees and suppliers, this would be kind of like the scope 3 that we spoke about in the last slide. So 41 to 60% of suppliers institute science-based carbon targets for operations and reducing carbon intensity of franchisees by 52 to 53%. So this last one I want to spend a moment on, because that means, again, if you're a franchisee, right, and even if you do not care about green brands, right, if that's not kind of your company's design, if your brand, right, if you're a Marriott branded property or Hilton branded property, for example, and they have these goals in place, then you're going to have to report up on your carbon emissions, on your carbon footprint, to help inform their ESG report. Okay. I'm going to flip over to the sample TAC. I'm not going to read this at you. This is a list of some of the common things that we saw, that are activities that different companies undertook to help reduce their carbon footprint. So on-site renewables, retro-commissioning, and I'd say that one because the retro-commissioning isn't like, it's nothing like crazy. It's like taking the equipment you already have in place and making sure that it's running efficiently, right? So if you have BAS system, making sure that it's appropriately synced and the settings are correct to maximize your efficiency. And then you can include things like your carbon offsets and your renewable energy credits, and your EV fleet and chargers. I know that's a hot topic these days. And then finally, policies, procedures, signage, and internal training. I can't say how important and enough how important that is to really make sure that you help hit your goals. The next ones will go through a little faster now that I've oriented you, I promise. So these are kind of typical water goals. Again, absolute water reduction, 50% seemed to be a magic number there, and reducing water intensity by 13 to 35%. So again, you also used absolute goals and the intensity goals. And we also saw that flow down to franchisees and suppliers for some of the brands. 15% reduction in water intensity. Again, that means you're going to have to track and share your data with and potentially your activities with your brands. Sample tactics are on the right, including everything from your obvious water efficient equipment. Get your low flow toilets in there, people, and your low flow faucets. Leak detection and repair for your for any irrigation systems, right? There is something called the Water Resource Certificate, WRCs, which aren't kind of as widely known as your renewable energy credits or carbon offsets, but that's something else that you can actually leverage to help reduce the size of your water footprint, something to be aware of. Okay, next we're going to go into waste. This is a fun one. So again, baseline years, goal years, right? We saw a lot more nuance on the waste side. So you have your absolute landfill waste reduction targets and your waste intensity targets. Again, pretty high numbers there. And then we saw people breaking these out in really interesting ways. So reducing your absolute food waste to landfills or your food waste intensity to landfills, those were actually very common goals throughout pretty much the vast majority of the reports that I reviewed. And then we saw some very specific, but very common additional threads. So 100% elimination of soap going to landfill. So that means either making it like reducing the waste associated with soap, using those little pumps in your rooms instead of having a bunch of bars sitting around, or having a recycling program in place for your soap bars so that they didn't actually hit the landfill. And obviously with that comes procedures, policies to help your staff make sure that those don't hit the trash cans. And then 100% elimination of single-use plastics. Love seeing that one. So that's a lot of water bottle initiatives as kind of a first pass, and there are a few other things, including those little plastic cups in rooms. And again, there were flow downs to both your franchisees and suppliers on this as well. I've already talked through a number of the sample tactics, so I won't spend more time going over those, but there's a little starter list for you. But I'm going to take a pause here before I go into the social side. So that was kind of a snapshot of the E side. I just want to really impress on you how important it is to not just buy all the shiny things and think that's going to solve all of your footprint issues. So one of the things we do at APTIM is that we oversee, we manage, we run the Sustainable Sport Index, which is basically like a state of the industry for the professional sports venue world, where we ask a series of sustainability questions, and then we put out a benchmarking report annually. We actually do have the pleasure and the absolute privilege of going to some of these venues and really seeing firsthand what's happening and how they're actually operating, and help them get to the next level in a more practical way. So this is a tale of two venues. Venue 1 and Venue 2, for obvious reasons, shall remain nameless. Not even going to tell you what their colors are, so don't even ask. So Venue 1 is made a high investment in equipment. They had all the fanciest network lighting controls, building automated systems. They had fancy waste bins. They spent a lot of money getting the infrastructure in place to make sure that they could really exceed and kind of be a great big shining star in terms of their efficiency and their footprints. Venue 2 made kind of a modern investment. They put in some network lighting controls and other things, but not the shiniest. They're a little bit dated. and they didn't cover all of the spaces. So on paper, you'd think that venue 1 was really going to be outperforming venue 2 in terms of how they were going to be making progress on their sustainability goals. But venue 1 didn't optimize their controls, right? Some of them weren't even commissioned. And so they weren't even like connected. They weren't programmed to actually be able to be used. Venue 2 did take the time to, and then made the investment to make sure that their systems were operating properly. Venue 1 didn't collect data and do analysis to help identify issues proactively, where venue 2 did. They had pretty robust data collection systems in place, and they did regular analysis to help identify those issues, like water leaks, right? Maybe underground, maybe difficult to see, but if you're looking at your water bills on a monthly basis, your usage, you can identify those a lot faster. And then staff training and signage, venue number 1 didn't really have much for that. Venue 2 had that everywhere, to the point where it really became cultural for them to turn off lights, for example. So not all their lights were connected, but their staff were always going around turning off lights. That was our observation on site. And as a kind of end result, venue 1 didn't have a ton of really great lift in sustainability efforts as a result of their pretty significant investment, whereas venue 2 did experience significant lift and improvement. So be a venue 2. You don't have to be fabulously wealthy or spend bajillions of dollars to be able to be sustainable. It's not all about having the right equipment, making strategic investments in equipment, yes, but getting all the fancy things out there without putting the right kind of infrastructure and training and support for your staff in place isn't an effective way to hit your sustainability goals. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We're going to shift over to social goals. And again, this will go faster. I'm sorry, but this is just so much good stuff from my perspective. So we saw a lot less consistency on the types of goals on the social side in the hospitality sector. So there's goals around pay equity, number of meals donated. There are a few that targeted that. There was a lot of conversation around volunteer hours. You can imagine the company who said 1,000 was significantly smaller than the 15 million volunteer hours goal. The increase in year-on-year impact for career pathing, right? So that professional development was really important to a few of these companies, to the point where they put them as written in stone goals. Investments, right? So you saw a lot of like community investments, especially in your diverse, at-risk, underserved communities, using that as an opportunity to invest to actually develop hospitality skills and get them into the hospitality sector. It was kind of it really it brings a lot of nice things together in the hospitality space, but I saw that one a few times. And again, there is some flow down to franchisees and suppliers, less on the franchisees space that I saw, but the domestic supplier spend with diverse and women-owned business was a goal that one of the companies had. And there are a lot of ways to help achieve this, right? So analyzing your pay equity, figuring out a food donation partner, tracking your food donations, make sure you have the infrastructure in place to make sure your food gets donated in an appropriate way and in the right amount of time so that it can be donated. Recruiting your talent from diverse organizations, and a whole host of other things. Again, policies, procedures, signage, and training, also very important in this space. And then finally, benchmarking governance. So this, I won't spend much time on at all. This is a lot of what percentage of leadership roles are held by women versus men, people of color, increase, and then there are increasing goals too, right? So it wasn't just like we want to have an absolute this many in each. It was also we want to get better by 50% instead of we want 50-50%, 50-50. And then 100% of hotels certified sustainable was another really interesting theme that I saw for a few of the different brands where they wanted all of their hotels to be certified. So again, that flows down. And then sample kind of tactics, again, that's about career pathing, and recruitment for your executive, your senior leadership, mentorship programs, targeted professional development. Okay, so that's a lot. How do you get started, right? It's a little bit overwhelming. I know that everyone's resource constrained these days. So how do you actually get traction? There's kind of we view it as like a 5-step process, where first it's really about assessing where you are, right? Understand your data. Data is a big theme with this, and David's going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Benchmark your peers. You're not people are doing this in your industry already, so look and see what they're doing. You don't have to recreate the wheel. Define your priorities and objectives. Understand what's important to your company, where your company sits on that Dunphy scale, and use that to inform the level of investment and prioritization for that you want for your sustainability initiatives. Do that assessment to understand where your data is, and you can have somebody come on site and actually do assessments as well. Plan. Take the time to create goals. You see them called science-based targets, SBTs, pretty often. Develop tactics, right? So figure out so you have your goal, but how are you going to achieve it? And is that actually possible? Do those things add up in a way that makes sense? And secure funding. Understand how much money you're going to need to be able to recruit to achieve those goals, and figure out where you can get that money from. There are a number of buckets of funding out there in the world, right? For example, for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, you've got your local utilities can often help with some of that. There's funding out there from the infrastructure bill and other recent legislation, and there are other resources out there as well. The next bucket is to execute. So step 3 is execute. That's, again, data analytics. So keeping an eye on that data and that collection and analysis of that data. Update your policies and procedures, because again, this isn't just about equipment. Implement your projects and train your staff. Step 4 is to verify. So did you actually achieve what you set out to do and what you've been implementing? So pause, right? Look at the data, get somebody on site if it makes sense to do so for your organization, to actually look and see if the things are actually being done that you believe are getting done, or that you've set that shall get done, and see if you're actually seeing results there. And then step 5 is to report. So your ESG report, your brand's ESG report. If you want to get a certification, right, like Green Key, for example, fabulous one, or you want to report through a framework, though you have to kind of work through all that process before you really get to step 5. And there are feedback loops. I just have 2 in here, but you really could draw an arrow from almost any bucket to another bucket, because if you're in a verification stage and it's not looking in the way that you thought it was going to look, then maybe you need to go back to step 2, right? Or if you're like, this is just not proving to be as important to our brand as we thought, or it's more important to our brand than we thought, maybe you need to go back to assess, right? So there are a lot of different steps there. As you look to get started on this process, collaboration is key. Use your brands and Green Key Global. Green Key has a lot of really nice resources, including this fabulous webinar on their website that are available for members. You can use your consultants to streamline the process and support your staff, right? Your staff is constrained. They may not have a lot of time to get smart on this stuff. So sometimes it can be more cost effective to actually hire outside parties to help you navigate this. And then take the first step. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? You don't need to spend a year going on step 1 and 2 to try to make it perfect. You can start executing on some of those more obvious things more quickly than that. And it's about a constant kind of journey iteration as you navigate your sustainability journey. Okay. With that, I'm going to flip it over to David to talk a little bit more about data. Hopefully we've drilled into you that it's very important.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, again, lots and lots of data we've got to collect for this, right? Not just because we need to be able to show the numbers, but that's really the only way to drive performance if you're able to effectively get your hands on the data to find those problems that you don't know about. Like, again, like Monica said earlier, the leaking water pipes underground that you may not see, but that are both costing you money and adding to your water usage. So just to walk through some of the bullets here, the first one under environment, gosh, it's only one line, but there's a lot baked into all that data: your electric bills, natural gas usage, other fuels like propane tanks you may use for, patio heating, all the different waste and water bills. That ends up being a hell of a lot, because it's a lot of data already for all your, properties on a monthly basis. But you have to stop and think about the fact that some of those things you have to get more granular on, like waste. It really, tracking just the total waste going out of your facility or solid waste often isn't enough to really drive performance. You usually have to break out, like, well, how much solid waste are we generating? How much on organics? How much for different recyclable streams? So it gets to that next level. And then when you look at where this information is coming from, there's a lot of different sources there. I just lost the slides. I'm not sure if that's just on my end or not, but they disappeared. But I'll keep going. A lot of different sources of data. When you look at, again, depending on where your properties are and such, there may be a number of different utilities you interface with, a number of different suppliers for things that the data sources are going to vary a lot. So again, just even this one bullet has a lot in it that you're going to have to track. And that's just for sort of your scope 1 and 2 things. You get into scope 3, and one common example is flight and other, travel related information for your employees, where you're not directly creating the emissions, but by virtue of buying that plane ticket, you're sort of indirectly causing, the carbon emissions from the airplane to become an issue. So tracking all that is a lot, and that's just on the environment side. Now we get over to social and governance, and it's a whole nother slew of things to track around staff demographics, compensation, different demographics on recruiting and hiring and retention and staff surveys. And some of this may be in your HR system, for example, some of it may not, but in any event, it's probably not really rolled up the way you need it. So when you start looking ahead to a tracking system, most people do start with something like Excel to start trying to pull this stuff together, right, as you're formulating your ESG strategy. And that's probably appropriate in most cases, honestly, because what that does is it helps you get an understanding really of all the things you track, where the data is coming from, what the quality issues, that manual aspect of working with Excel sort of forces you to spend more time with the data than you may want to, but it opens your eyes to those realities that you really need to understand to get started. And quite honestly, you can't really go into more sort of robust data tracking solutions until you have that fundamental understanding of what it is you're trying to do and how you need to do it. That said, long-term, Excel probably isn't the right tool for most organizations unless you're, on the small side, because you need the solution itself to be sustainable. This is data that's going to keep coming in every month. You can't have it be a continually labor-intensive situation. You need that data accessible, obviously, because you've got to evaluate it in a lot of different ways to drive that performance. You've got to drill down to facility level to look for exceptions and that sort of thing. And you also need it to be auditable. If you go back to an Excel spreadsheet from a year ago, well, where'd you get these numbers from? Well, the Excel spreadsheet doesn't really tell you that, right? And a lot of there's software on the market that provides that sort of audit trail. So in the end, while spreadsheets are the right way to start, they're probably not your long-term solution. So we're seeing a lot of organizations going to enterprise level software solutions that are on the market, whether it's in hospitality as well as other industries, to kind of fill this gap. Again, these are sort of cloud-based software solutions. So it's easy to give access to multiple parties when you've got brands and management companies and franchisees that all need to both provide and have access to data. It gives you a platform to share that. But like any enterprise platform, they do take time to plan out, to implement, to maintain. So it's not something that you just sign up and you're off and running. You still have to plan out. You have to know your data enough to know what you need to collect, where it's coming from, how you need to use it, and all those sorts of things. So it's a great solution, definitely one we advocate, but it is something that you have to kind of go into it sort of eyes wide open like that. Once you've got the system, then in addition to just, of course, the incoming data, it gives you a platform to then track your goals, whether those are at the top level. But of course, you've got to, if you're to achieve and drive performance at that top level, you've got to set goals at the smaller level. So the tools give you the ability to do that sort of thing. Having the data better organized obviously can help with any certification efforts you may be going through, because a lot of those require data, right? And so it gives you a platform. It's yet one more way you may have to summarize the data, and it gives you that central location to do that. And then the last point I wanted to make is around what we call them stories. We think of data as always being numbers, right? But within ESG, there's a lot of sort of qualitative information that's really valuable. It can really help you both tell your story in an effective way, but also help drive engagement, I think, within your organizations. And a lot of these, collecting them throughout the year and as things are going, it helps to emphasize your efforts. Again, it can also help with execution. If you treat these sort of stories of different initiatives you're doing as almost like projects themselves, and identifying them, making sure they're getting done, and then acknowledging the benefits of them. Again, it creates a really strong story you can tell at the end of the year, where you've got real data, qualitative data, but data nonetheless to back it up. And then again, it sort of gives credit to the people within your organization who are taking the time and investing their efforts into this, that their efforts aren't going to go unnoticed because they don't affect, the electric bill directly or some other metric that's being tracked. So that's really important as well. So Christian, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, great stuff. And, this is why we talk about APTIM having this resiliency team. Is my power just went out, and of course Monica jumped in to share the slides, so thanks so much for that. So David, great stuff. Obviously a lot of information in regards to this this presentation today, but some great key takeaways. Creating an ESG report is good business. We are seeing this throughout the hospitality industry, and it's just, at the end of the day, great for business. Franchisees and management companies are becoming key contributors. So if you are part of a brand, you are probably already being asked to report some of this information, if not all of this. But again, if you're not, be prepared. You're going to begin reporting on this information. If you're an independent hotel, it's probably something that's on your mind. So again, just beginning to get started on there. Accurate and accessible data is key. Looking at where your data is coming from, or even just stepping back and beginning to figure out where the data is coming in, again, key. It all begins with the data. And just get started. It's okay. This is a very big topic, and this is why we brought this webinar series with Green Key Global to educate hoteliers in regards to this topic. It's coming at the industry pretty quickly, and it's okay to just take one step forward in any direction. It is a start. So we're excited about these next steps within the industry, and that's that. So we'll go ahead and, we just want to let you know, feel free to reach out to myself. My contact information's up there. We're happy to answer any specific questions to your organization, your properties, your company, whatever it might be. We're happy to answer those questions for you. Just a little housekeeping notes. We do have 2 more webinars in our series. The next one is next Wednesday, October 12th. And that's a goal to zero waste, where it will be a discussion on waste reduction. And I put a little teaser in there. You may or may not have heard about the recent fine that Ritz-Carlton received for only 8 of their properties out in California. But $500,000 in the hospitality industry is a lot of money. And but with improper disposal of hazardous waste, is one of those things that could have been corrected prior to these fines. So we'll discuss that in greater detail in that next webinar, and then put it on your calendar as well as we continue to dive in to energy conservation and clean energy. We'll talk more about EV charging in our October 19th webinar. So we're looking forward to having you attend those future webinars. Share it with your teams. We'd love to have you participate in those as well. But with that, we'd love to open it up to any questions that our participants might have to answer for you right now. And while we're waiting for those to come in, Monica, I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning the culture. Hospitality is a culture that team members feel at each property and within corporate offices. It is a true culture, and your sustainability efforts will only succeed further and further with regards to culture.
I think we answered all the questions.
I know. I figured, with that much information, we would probably have a couple come through that might be specific. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out should you have any questions. If you're a little shy to ask here, happy to answer them for you. Now, one question, I know, David, you kind of mentioned this, but let's say a brand has a technology that's available out there. Is that something that I should just go with in regards to their technology, if that's kind of being pushed through for my data collection?
Oh, as far as for data management, obviously, it's all very case by case, right? And I think one thing that's important to realize with ESG is you often are not going to get to a point where you're going to have one system doing everything, because when you go the full realm of environmental and sustainability all the way over to all the social issues that are tracked in your HR system, you sometimes end up with 2 or 3 different sources. So it's really a case by case evaluation that folks have to do based on your situation and what your investment is. I think for larger organizations long term, you're going to want to have a system that you control. So starting with a system that maybe is made available to you that you can leverage may be a good way to start. But that long-term view, just from other experiences over time, that lack of control of the system starts to present problems. So it could be a stepping stone, I guess, more than anything.
Awesome. Here's a great question, and I'll let either of you go with this one. So is there a rough cost for budgeting? For example, cost per ton greenhouse gas reduction?
I'll hop on that one first. So there isn't a rule of thumb, right? Just candidly, it's going to really depend on your current operations, right? How much kind of low-hanging fruit is there, and what your goals are, right? How aggressive are those goals? The first tons are usually the least expensive, right? Because in some cases, doing things that to reduce your carbon footprint can actually save you money, right? So putting in lighting and occupancy sensors in your rooms, for example, means the lights aren't on and you're not spending money on electricity when nobody's in that space, and that can save you money. That can have a pretty quick payback. But as you get deeper on your journey, right, if you're looking to purchase offsets to or put in solar panels to kind of get to that next level, those tend to have a little bit longer payback period. So it's a punt, but I feel like it's a true punt, where it just really depends on where you are and what your goals are, how deep you want to go.
And that can begin with just a small little thing. Again, going back to that culture, is training with your staff on thinking like an owner, right? That's an easy way to do it. Of get your housekeeping staff, your housekeeping supervisors, your food and beverage teams to think, should I turn off these lights when I'm not in these rooms, or this waste that was just occurred in the kitchen, could we have done something differently to eliminate that? So good stuff.
Yeah.
Here's a great question. What are some short-term challenges for a hotelier beginning their ESG reporting, and how would you overcome them?
I'll take a swing at that one, and I just can't stop myself. So like this is a big deal, right? This is like, it seems insurmountable, because these documents can be 20 pages long, they can be 100 pages long. So one, don't get spooked. Right. So look at them, benchmark, see what other folks in your industry are talking about, how they're talking about it. Understand what structures you like, what outlines it, because it is a very, ESG reporting is a very dynamic space. There isn't 100% consistency, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of how people are reporting. So pick one that you like and you think will work for your company, and really kind of demystify it, right? And don't be intimidated by the scale, and just start. And also recognize that ESG reporting, obviously the gold standard is we have these amazing 5 and 20-year science-based goals, right? That takes a while to get to, and you don't have to have those for your first ESG report. You can start out your ESG report in a more kind of aspirational way and say like, hey, here are our objectives, our goals around sustainability. Here are some steps we're taking in the next year to help get there. And here's kind of where we are today. You don't even have to have metrics in your ESG report for your first couple, right? Like it takes time to kind of get your story in place, to get your narrative refined, to get that data in place, and to set those goals. So don't feel like you have to let perfect be the enemy of the good. Just get started.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Who else has a great question? That's a good one.
Only great questions, please. Just kidding.
Any question is good.
Christian, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Looking into your crystal ball, how kind of pervasive do you think ESG reporting will be in the hotel industry in 5 years and in 10 years?
I think we would see that every brand in the next 5 years will have a report. And I feel that the management companies are going to begin that process as well in the next 5 years. And the reason is that management companies are not only focused on managing properties, but they're also focused on gaining new business, new hotels to run. And so ensuring that they have an ESG report to be able to point a potential client to, I think is going to be a key tool for future. And I think in 10 years, this will be the norm. This will be a standard within the hospitality industry all across the board. Especially as we look at it as, 2030 is 7.5 years away, not even. And a lot of those goals are specific to 2030. So I think folks are going to be sitting here going, okay, well, 2025, yeah, that's only a couple years away. You could still achieve a goal by 2025. But when you look at 2030, I think some bigger goals out there, again, something to look at and push forward to each and every year is a benefit. So I think we'll begin to see that, throughout the industry.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much for leading us through this really thought-provoking presentation and discussion on ESG reporting. It's been fabulous. I saw some regional heads of hotel chains on the line, so thank you for joining us. Today, the session is of course recorded, like I said, and it will be available on demand on the Green Key Global website with any of the links shared. So thank you to our guests, and thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a great webinar.
Well, thank you for having us. We're looking forward to the next one, Rebecca. And
absolutely.
Please don't hesitate to reach out if we can answer any questions for you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.